Hey all, I'm back to do another reading. I hope that you had a good week. Mine went by really fast. My kids have one final week of school and then they're home for the summer. So it is going to be a bit of a challenge to finish off The Demon Queen, which is my focus this summer. My critique partner has been reading it, so I took a break to work on my Cozy Fantasy, which is the next book that I'm going to publish after that, which I haven't shared many details on yet, but it's a really fun magic system. I always have fun making magic systems, so yeah, it's unique in the worlds that I've created so far. Anyway, but I'm getting that back, and I'm going to go through her comments this weekend, and then I'm going to get back into working on the story and trying to finish it up by the end of summer. But yeah, it seems like I'm always trying to finish a book in summer, and I wish that wasn't the case because summer is a little more laid back and less structured with my kids being home all the time and them wanting to do stuff. But it's just always how it plays out, I guess. Often finishing books in summer and then trying to publish them in the fall. Which, you know, fall is a really fun time for books to come out because then everything is all cozy. Anyway, I am very rambly today, so I probably should cut off this little intro before I keep talking about random stuff. Okay, so last week we read chapter 14, and they're now all in Avern. The local healer, Mistress Gertrude, is taking care of Elena, and she has told Lyric and Runa that they're going to have to get a dragon blessed, a mage healer, in order to help their mother. So yeah, let's find out what happens next. All right. Chapter 15, Lyric. Gertrude looked up, eyes taking in Lyric's cleaned face as she entered the room. The healer sat on a chair beside the bed, her hands folded and her bag packed beside her feet. How is she? Lyric asked. She approached the bed and reached for her mother's hand lying on the coverlet, checking her pulse. Elena was bathed and redressed in a clean shift and covered with a thick blanket. Her eyes were closed, her lashes copper against her pale skin, and though she still breathed, her chest barely moved. Dark green salve covered a gash across Elena's forehead, the torn skin sewn together with delicate thread. She seemed thinner, as if the flesh had sunk into her skull, sharpening the planes of her face. Lying there, their mother looked like Runa. She seemed smaller, sharper, younger. She won't wake, Gertrude said. Not until a dragon blessed removes the corruption inside her. She's stable, so you should have time to bring one here. Lyric nodded. What do we owe you? She asked, sitting on the bed, still holding Elena's hand. A silver. It was a high price, half the cost of their room for the night. Lyric glanced at the small table opposite the bed and saw their mother's bag and belt neatly stacked atop it. Had Gertrude found the pendant while searching for Elena's shift? Runa will pay you, Lyric said, looking back at the healer. Thank you, Mistress Gertrude. Gertrude nodded and stood, her joints cracking as she bent to pick up her bag. I'll return in the morning to change the dressing. I believe you have skill with that yourself if you'd like me to leave supplies. Yes, thank you. Gertrude removed a roll of cloth from her bag and placed it on the table. I'll return in the morning anyway to see how she's doing. She looked at Lyric, her blue eyes direct. I applied salve to the burn on her arm. It's healing. Thank you. Lyric watched the woman, wondering what thoughts drifted behind her penetrating gaze, but Gertrude just nodded and opened the door to leave. Once she'd gone, Lyric looked around for their mother's soiled clothes and the towels Gertrude used to clean away the blood. She couldn't see them anywhere. Maggie must have collected them to wash with their dresses. She'd have to thank the innkeeper for her kindness. The feeling of being watched prickled the skin on Lyric's neck, and she turned her head to stare at the wall behind her, finding nothing. She'll live, I think, Gandara said inside her head. Lyric jumped and looked down at Elena's face. It was unsettling how easily Gandara slipped in and out of her thoughts, like she'd carved out a place for herself inside Lyric's head. For a moment, she felt as if someone else stared through her eyes, sharing her sight. Yes, Lyric said softly. She knew she could respond to Gandara by thinking, but it felt less peculiar using her voice. I'm tempted to check the stitching, but Mistress Gertrude's hands were steady. Will you head north to find a dragon blessed? Lyric frowned. How did Gandara know about that? Was she listening inside Lyric's head even when she wasn't aware of her? Could she hear her private thoughts, or only what Lyric heard outside her head? An image of Kel filled her mind, and Lyric flushed. Did Gandara know her thoughts about Kel? Yes, north, Lyric said, trying to ignore her embarrassment. One of us will go, I think. Maggie said there were no runners here to send. A thought occurred to her. Do you know any runes, any spell that could help my mother? Or perhaps you know what the Dragon Blessed will do. Can you teach me? No, Gandara said. I was never skilled in healing. Disappointed, Lyric stroked Elena's hand. Don't let Runa go by herself. What? Why not? Lyric asked. She hadn't begun considering who should go, but knowing her sister, Runa would volunteer. She'd wanted to travel ever since they were little, always making up stories about the lands outside their secluded valley. Can you trust she'll come back? Gandara asked. She's wanted to be free for a long time. Of course she'll come back, Lyric said irritably. Runa won't abandon us, abandon me. The fire's growing stronger inside her blood. She's being changed by it. I trust my sister, Gandara. Irritated, Lyric let go of her mother's hand. Of course, that isn't the only reason I caution sending her alone. We haven't even decided who will go, Lyric said. You must stay together. There was weight to Gandara's words that cooled Lyric's temper. Why? Bad things happen when you're apart. We've been apart many times on errands and trips to town, Lyric said. Not for long. Were you together when Runa slipped free of her body? No, of course not. Were you together when your mother left? Lyric paused, thinking back all those years ago. They'd been together, hadn't they? They usually were. Runa wanted to play in the field, and Lyric was... No, she was searching the forest for golden seal. Their mother had asked her to fetch some. You must stay together, Gandara said. We can't all leave, Lyric said. Someone has to stay with Mama. Stay together. Your mother will be fine. Was that admiration Lyric felt from Gandara? She'd seemed lukewarm about their mother before. What had changed? A knock startled Lyric from their conversation, and she jumped, putting a hand over her thundering heart. Yes? She called. It's Maggie. I have dinner. Oh, yes. Lyric smoothed her hand over her waist and stood up, opening the door. Maggie stepped inside, holding a tray with linen napkins, 3 bowls of broth, thick slices of bread and cheese, and 2 mugs of dark, foamy beer. Lyric cleaned their mother's things from the table so Maggie could set the food down. Is Runa coming? She asked. Yes, I believe so, Maggie said, smiling brightly. She was settling up with Granny. And Kel? I believe your companion is taking his meal downstairs. Thank you, Maggie. Everything smells wonderful. Maggie beamed. I brought a bowl for your mother in case you're able to get her to eat. Granny suggested trying to feed her something. Lyric nodded. Thank you for your kindness, Maggie. I don't know what we'd have done without you. I'm pleased I could help. Maggie gave Lyric an apologetic look and rested a hand on her hip. I couldn't convince anyone to go north to fetch Dragon Blessed. I did ask. That's all right, Lyric said. She paused, thinking of her earlier conversation with Gandara. If both my sister and I go, can my mother stay here until we return? We can pay for her care. Maybe your son Elias could sit with her occasionally for a copper or 2? Maggie pursed her lips, considering. Yes, I don't see why not. Jim shouldn't complain, as you are paying customers, and I'm sure Granny will look in on your mother. Lyric nodded. Your companion Kel should go with you, of course, Maggie said. It's not safe for 2 young women to travel alone. Thank you, Maggie. I'll speak with my sister and let you know our plans in the morning. Maggie nodded. Leave your dishes outside the door, and I'll return them to the kitchen. Breakfast will be at first light, and I can prepare food for you to take. She reached for Lyric's hand, squeezing softly. I'm happy to help, however I can, she said. My mother endured a long illness before she passed. I know how difficult it can be. She squeezed Lyric's hand again, then released it. If you need anything, please let me know. Runa and Kel appeared as Maggie was leaving and exchanged greetings before slipping inside the room. How is she? Kel asked. Runa looked Elena over, then prowled to the tray of food on the table. The same, Lyric said, as Kel stepped up to her. She leaned into him, breathing in his crisp mountain scent. She's getting weaker, I think, but the change is slow. She looked up at him, studying the features that had become familiar and comforting. Did you eat? Kel looked fatigued. Bathed and wearing another man's clothes, the only other hints of the horror he'd survived were scabbing cuts on his temples and his blackened eye. Just about to, he said. I wanted to check on you first, and Elena. You could eat here. Lyric wasn't entirely sure how they'd all fit, the 3 of them together, but she found herself offering regardless. I'll be fine downstairs, Kel said. Unless you want me to stay? Runa snorted and picked up a slice of bread. No, that's fine, Lyric said, ignoring her sister. I mean, of course, I'd like your company, but that's fine. She flushed, earning a crooked smile. What are you planning to do? Cal asked, now that we're here. Mistress Gertrude, the healer, thinks we need a dragon bless to heal Mama, Lyric said. Oh, Cal said, brows nodding over his eyes. Because of the creatures. Something happened with her magic, Runa said. It poisoned her somehow. Alarm rolled across Kel's face. The taint? No, I don't think so. Something else, something a traditional healer can't fix. I asked Gandara if she knows a spell that can help, but she doesn't. I hadn't thought to ask Eleonora, Runa said, narrowing her eyes, though I think she won't know either. She seems more inclined to destroy something than put it back together. One of us will have to find a mage healer and convince them to come to Avern. Maybe the gold will be enough to pay for their journey back. She looked up, her eyes on Lyric. I think I should go. Gandara's warning echoed in Lyric's head, and she steadied her sister's face without answering. I could go, Cal offered. I've traveled through Rendishar before. There might be a dragon blessed in Helden's Rock, a city north of here. Mistress Gertrude thinks they've all gone to the capital, Lyric said. Cal frowned. The festival, their yearly pilgrimage. I can check along the way, see if one stayed behind. No, I'll go, Runa said. If the closest dragon blessed is in Rathgar's hold, then I'll speak with our grandfather and tell him what happened to Mother. I'm not sure we can trust him, but we are family. I might need more money to return with the healer swiftly, and he can hire a carriage for me or loan me a horse. A king should have fast horses. A horse? Lyric asked. You've only ridden one once. I can manage, Runa said, sticking out her jaw. No, Lyric shook her head. I'm not letting you run off on your own. What if something happens? You've never traveled alone before, and you're not familiar with the land or the customs here. Taking up Mother's mantle, are you? Runa asked. Lyric sighed and raised an eyebrow. You know what I'm saying is true. I know you can take care of yourself, but if the Sareni are attacking, the road could be dangerous. What if someone tries to kidnap you, or you get hurt? I talked to Maggie, and she said she'll care for Mama when we leave. Lyric gestured at the chair beside the bed. She'll even let Elias sit with her, and Mistress Gertrude will keep Mama as comfortable as possible. We can't do any more than she can anyway, not knowing the flora here. Runa pursed her lips. Don't give me that look, Lyric said. I don't like the idea of leaving Mama any more than you do, especially with strangers, but we don't have a choice. We can trust Maggie. I'm certain of it. You're willing to leave Mother in the care of a woman you just met today? Runa asked, arching an eyebrow. Lyric hesitated, her stomach flipping. Honestly, she didn't like the idea of leaving their mother alone. What if Elena died while they were gone, surrounded by strangers? But if Runa went to Rathgar's hold alone and didn't come back? Guilt pressed like a fist against her chest. Runa had never abandoned her. Why would she now? But after Gandara's warning, Lyric couldn't let her sister go off alone, even if that meant leaving their mother behind. We have to stick together, Lyric said lamely. Frowning, Runa twisted the bread in her hands. It's true we'll be safer together, but you forget. Neither of us are exactly helpless. She wiggled her fingers as though summoning fire. I'd offer to stay with Elena, Kel said slowly, tightening his arm around Lyric's shoulders. But I worry about you traveling alone. As you pointed out, Lyric, neither you or Runa have visited Rendishar before. Elena will be safe here. Maggie and Jim seem honest and capable. He looked at Lyric, then shifted his gaze to Runa. I don't want to alarm you, but the Sareni seem to have the upper hand. They recently destroyed the entire Rendisharan navy. Yes, Runa said. Lyric glanced at her in surprise, her eyebrows raised. The navy? Maggie told me when I arrived, Runa said. She smiled grimly. I forgot to tell you. They almost didn't help us. They thought the Sareni attacked me, and I would bring trouble down on their heads. She mentioned the ships then. One of the men downstairs said they burned a house here, Kel said. The Sareni seem to have backed off now, but they're patrolling up and down the coast, sinking or boarding every Rendisharan ship they encounter. Trade by sea is cut off, and all merchants now travel north of the Katrin Mountains from Chiancia. Kel looked down at Lyric. Despite the Sareni attack in Avern, I think your mother will be safer here than we will be heading up the coast. They only burned one house. The capital would be their true prize. Lyric nodded. She thought the same thing, and it wasn't safe to move their mother anyway. We should keep our connection to our grandfather quiet, Lyric said. I don't think Maggie or Jim would voluntarily give Mama to the Sareni, but we don't want anyone to find out who she is. Lyric thought about the pendant in their mother's belt. Had Mistress Gertrude seen it? If she had, what might she do? Fine, Runa said. The three of us will travel together. She reached for a bowl of broth. We may need to prove our connection to Mother when we seek an audience with our grandfather. He's a king, after all. I doubt they'll let us into the castle on our word alone. Mama's pendant, Lyric said. It looks like something special. Perhaps he'll recognize it. Or they'll think we're thieves, Runa said. You look Rendesharan, Kel said, looking at Runa. I can see Elena in you. Perhaps King Rakarn will as well. He smiled at Lyric. You, however, look like you could be at home on the deck of a ship with the wind in your hair. Lyric smiled, her cheeks heating. For some reason, she found Kel's comment intimate. I look Sireni, you mean? Enough to give pause, Kel said. That explains the suspicious looks downstairs, Lyric said. Kel's lips curved and he brushed his fingers across her cheek. Despite his smile, his eyes were worried. You look like your mother, too. I don't think anyone will chase you away for fear you're Sireni, but I agree, we should keep your heritage secret. We'll leave tomorrow, Runa said. We can make arrangements with Maggie in the morning. Lyric nodded. The sooner we leave, the better. We don't know how much time Mama has. I'll let you eat, Kel said. I'll likely stumble to my bed after grabbing a quick bite downstairs. I'll find you in the morning? Lyric nodded, and Kel embraced her, resting his chin on the top of her head. After he left, Lyric took a bowl of broth and sat down on the edge of the bed. We should try to feed Mama, she said, or give her water. We can soak a napkin, drip some broth in her mouth. Runa nodded. Eat first, Lai, then we'll try. We have a long walk ahead of us and need to sleep. Do you think he'll help us? Lyric asked, taking a bite of bread. Kel? No, our grandfather. What if he won't? Runa raised her eyebrows. I thought you were the optimistic one. What if he won't let us leave? Well, then we'll escape, Runa said, and we'll come back here and heal Mother ourselves. He has secret libraries, doesn't he? Magic tomes? We'll bribe a maid. Even secret libraries need dusting, don't they? We'll figure it out like we always do. We won't let her die, Lai. You won't leave me, will you, Rue? Leave you? Runa arched an eyebrow. What are you talking about? Nothing. I'm just tired. Lyric smiled. To the end? Runa reached for a mug of beer and held it up. To the end. It was cold and foggy the morning Lyric, Runa, and Kel left Ivern. Elena was still unconscious and being watched by Maggie's son Elias. Though she hadn't worsened in the night, Lyric thought their mother felt colder when she'd kissed her cheek goodbye and promised they'd return. They paid for a full week of Elena's care with the promise of settling the account if something delayed their return. The dragon-eye pendant and the rest of their mother's money, including the gold, they'd taken with them. Maggie packed food for their trip. Freshly baked bread, thick slices of cheese, dried fish, a bottle of wine, and crab and oat cakes, carefully wrapped in waxed paper. She'd also returned their clothes and cloaks, washed and repaired. Fingers passing over her mended cloak, the neat stitches reminded Lyric of the creature's claws, and she shivered, lost in memories, until Kel's touch returned her to the inn. Looking towards the stairs, Lyric saw Runa standing in front of a middle-aged man with angry blue eyes and a thin mustache. He said something, gesturing towards the ceiling, and Lyric watched her sister lean forward and raise her hand. Fire sparked atop the tips of her fingers, and the man drew back, eyes widening and face draining of color. Mumbling something, he moved away and stumbled into Jim, who was passing with an armload of wood. Lyric raised her eyebrows. Runa stomped past, but her scowling sister didn't seem to notice. Giving Maggie a distracted farewell, Lyric followed Runa out of the inn. She wanted to ask her what had happened, but her sister took off while she waited for Kel. The road leading away from Ivern was not one of the smoother, well-traveled routes of the west, but a pitted and winding path that wandered along the steep black cliffs. Kel fell into step beside Lyric, his face lightening as he took in the expanse of blue water to the east. Lyric was grateful for his height, as a cutting ocean wind had diffused the fog, forcing it to lift, and it seemed quite intent on blowing both her and Runa over. Stepping over a large hole, Lyric glanced sideways at her sister. Did you threaten someone when we left? He thinks we've brought them trouble, Runa said, that the Sareni know us. Lyric frowned, trying to recall the unfriendly faces watching them leave. Who was he? I don't know, a local, but he looked at the stairs and said it'd be better if we all moved on. Lyric pursed her lips. Maggie and Jim won't let anyone hurt Mama. You hope they won't, Runa said, face flinty. You danced flame across your fingers. That was risky, Rue. The Sareni burned a home there. Runa touched her red hair. A Sareni, not a Rendesharan mage. Frowning, Lyric stared at her sister's unrepentant profile. Did Runa truly not see the potential trouble she'd left in their wake? Sometimes people need an incentive to make the right choice, Runa said. Did Eleonora tell you to do it? Lyric asked. Runa looked at her, eyes flashing. Eleanor doesn't make me do anything, Lai. It just seems impulsive. You trust Maggie and Jim? Runa raised an eyebrow. Without question? That they'll choose our mother over their neighbors, their town? Lyric glanced up at Kel, who was listening thoughtfully, and met her sister's eyes again. I trust they'll care for Mama. They'll protect her. She ignored the guilt curdling her stomach. We had no choice anyway. We have to trust someone. And now that man will reconsider doing anything that might hurt Mother, Runa said. Or did you create an enemy where there was none? Focus your worries on what lies ahead, Lai, not behind us. Runa marched ahead, fists clenched at her sides. Disquieted, Lyric resisted the urge to look back, though Ivern was no longer visible. What drove Runa to display her magic so impulsively? It hadn't been necessary to threaten anyone. Perhaps it will have the desired effect, Kel said, tucking Lyric's hand over his arm. Or when we didn't anticipate, Lyric said softly. I believe they're honorable people. I'm sure they'll keep Elena safe while we're gone. I hope so. Falling quiet, Lyric let her thoughts drift and turned her eyes to the land around them. It was a barren landscape along the road, the black stone sharp and unforgiving. She was grateful more than once for the sturdy boots covering her feet. Occasionally, straggly tufts of grass poked up from the uneven ground, having found a foothold in pockets of dark soil. Trees were few and far between. Looking west, Lyric saw that the obsidian-like ground stretched away from her in an uneven expanse, rising and falling as though shaped by earthquakes. Far in the distance, she could see the land rise into hills that reminded her of jagged teeth. They were nothing like the pastoral slopes and majestic mountains of Calise. Lyric spied several scraggly goats standing like sentinels atop the jagged hills, their black coats making them nearly indistinguishable from the rocky ground. She tugged on Kel's arm, pointing them out, and together they debated what such an animal might eat in Rendishar's harsh environment. Birds were their more constant companions, a collection of seabirds and raptors wheeling through the open sky as if reveling in the strong winds. When one bird dove unexpectedly towards the ground, Lyric was sure it'd kill itself on the sharp rock, but it lifted at the last moment with a triumphant shriek, a small rodent dangling from its claws. Around noon, the three of them stopped at a rocky overlook that jutted over the ocean, sharing a simple lunch of Maggie's crab cakes and small reddish apples Kel found growing beside the road. Unable to entice Runa into a conversation, Lyric leaned against Kel's shoulder and ate in silence. She scanned the unending stretch of sea for a Sereni ship, but saw nothing on the water. Lyric's thoughts drifted to their mother. Stay alive, Mama. Please hold on. She tossed the apple core off the cliff into the roiling ocean below. Her lunch settled like a rock in her stomach. Should she have stayed? Should she have let Runa go on her own? She doubted a different decision would have made her feel any better. Chapter 16. Runa. Runa was in a sour mood when they arrived at Heldon's Rock. Her head had throbbed for the past hour, and every time she looked at Lyric walking cozily with Kel, she was reminded of her sister's words. I'm not acting impulsively, Runa thought stubbornly. You didn't have to come, Lyric. You could have stayed and watched Mother yourself. Eleonora's stern presence coalesced in the back of Runa's mind, spiking her headache. You did the right thing, girl. That man had murder in his eyes. Gritting her teeth, Runa stared down at the city and tried to shake off her irritation as Lyric stepped up beside her. Heldon's Rock sat in the bottom of a basin, as if it slid down the cliffs and caught at the water's edge. She could see a large, sleek ship with bright blue sails sitting just outside the mouth of the harbor. It's preventing the fishing ships from leaving, Lyric said, pointing towards the dock. Indeed, a large cluster of boats floated inside the marina. At this time of day with clear weather, the fishermen should have been out dragging their nets in the water. It's a Sereni ship, Kel said. Is it safe to go down into the city? Lyric asked. We don't have a choice, Runa said, turning towards the road. They followed the well-worn track as it zigzagged down the slope. Approaching the city's gates, they found them open, with 2 uniformed guards watching the road. More guards drifted across the walkway above, their attention directed at the sea and not Runa, Lyric, and Kel. One of the gate guards, a tall woman with blue eyes, gave them a disinterested look as she shifted her pike in the dirt and yawned, looking past them at the road. The second guard frowned, then waved them over. He was short and shaped like a barrel, with brown skin and a stubbled chin, a scar marking the cleft at its center. Business? He asked. His eyes narrowed on Lyric's face. We're looking for a healer, Runa said. The guard studied them again, as if to ascertain who required one. Where did you come from? Ivern, Lyric said. She shifted closer to Kel and smiled pleasantly. clearly unnerved by the man's stare. "There's a curfew at midnight," the guard said. "Make sure you're not out past then." "Of course, thank you," Runa said. The guard nodded, giving them a satisfied grunt, then waved them through. The gate led directly into the market, and Runa, Lyric, and Kel paused at its entrance, getting their bearings along the shops and canopied stalls that lined the main street. Runa felt an uneasy awareness in the air, a weightiness that pressed on everyone's shoulders and filled each eye that glanced her way with suspicion. Hearing the crisp crunch of something beneath her heel, she looked down and saw that bits of sea-tumbled stone and crushed shells covered the ground. Runa drew a deep breath into her lungs. The air smelled of baking sausages, fresh fish, crispy fry bread, and the salty smell of the ocean weaving throughout. Someone pushed her, and Runa shot a pointed glare at a man striding past, but he didn't seem to notice. "It's so large," Lyric said, staring around with wide eyes. "Stop gawking," Runa snapped. "You look like a hayseed." Lyric stuck her tongue out, making a face. "It's the largest town you've seen too, Rue. Don't be a snob." Disapproval simmered through her, and Runa frowned as she felt her mood shift darker. It wasn't her feeling, though, was it? Lyric wasn't being that annoying. Runa focused, chasing the emotion, and felt Eleanor shift in the back of her head. Eleanor? Her ancestor didn't respond, pulsing irritably before she drifted away like the airy seeds of a cathead flower. Immediately, Runa's mind was lighter, calmer. Was Eleanor intentionally influencing her emotions, or was it merely an unforeseen effect of their connection, similar to what Runa shared with her sister? "Runa?" Runa blinked, seeing Lyric's face in front of her. "Are you well?" Lyric raised an eyebrow. "You went away. Is Eleonora here? Is she talking to you?" "Just thinking," Runa said. They had more pressing issues than Eleanor's sour mood affecting her. "Where would the Dragon Blessed be, do you think?" Runa asked, looking around. "At their temple, I'd expect," Kel said. Runa nodded and marched to one of the stalls. A dark-haired woman, a few years older than her, glanced up as she approached, smiling hopefully. She raised a polished wood comb in one hand and turned it, so the pearlescent shell inlaid in the handle caught the light. "A comb for you, miss?" she asked. "No, thank you," Runa said. "We're looking for a Dragon Blessed temple." The woman's smile slipped, and she set the comb back down, eyeing Runa as the gate guard had. "Keep going until the fountain, then head right," she said. "It's several streets over. You can't miss it." Her eyes shifted to Lyric, and she began to lift the comb again, but before she could say another word, Runa hooked her arm through her sister's and hauled her away. "I'm not a fisher bird," Lyric said, grinning at her. "I don't become moon-eyed over every shiny thing I see." "I've seen you at the tinker's wagon." Lyric laughed and elbowed her playfully. "I'm glad you're not still mad at me." "I wasn't mad." Runa scanned the faces in the crowd as they wove their way down the street, and kept an eye out for the fountain. "No?" Lyric asked. Runa felt her stare at the side of her face. "If there's no Dragon Blessed here, we should find a wise woman or healer," Runa said, thinking ahead. "Maybe Mistress Gertrude is wrong, and there is a way to heal Mother without a mage healer. She could have a treatable infection unique to this area." "It doesn't hurt to ask," Lyric agreed. "It's better for Mama if we're not forced to go all the way to the capital." Her mood darkened again, likely worrying about their mother alone in Avern. "There's the fountain," Kel said. Taller than either of them, he could see over the crowd. A moment later, Runa saw the fountain herself. It was a single basin with a dragon statue in the center. The dragon stretched towards the sky on clawed feet, its mouth open mid-roar. Water sprayed out between its teeth and cascaded back into the stone bowl beneath it. "Beautiful," Lyric mused. "Look at the painted scales." Turning right, they followed along another shell-lined street, the shops giving way to narrow houses of dark wood. In the alleys on either side, Runa saw lines of laundry. "Look, do you see those wings?" Kel asked, pointing ahead of them. "Maybe that's the temple." The street abruptly opened up, and they found themselves in front of a weather-beaten building, proud despite its aged appearance. "This is it," Runa said with certainty. Built from wood that might have once been a warmer hue, the Dragon Blessed temple had turned the uneven gray shade that Runa was starting to recognize as typical of a seaside structure subjected to salt-filled winds. The curved roof and iron spikes adorning the door made the temple look like there was a dragon perched atop it, readying for flight. Unlike the other buildings in town, close together and sharing walls, the temple sat inside a large, clean yard bordered by a low barrier of black stone. A black sand path ran from the street to the front steps. The rest of the lot was pale sand and raked into zigzagging patterns. "This is it," Runa said. They didn't have temples or houses of worship back in Elai's Hollow, just an outdoor shrine to the Trinity in the center of town. But there was always a tangible feeling in sacred places, as though the air had changed by years of whispered supplications and performed rites. Setting her jaw, Runa marched up the blackened path to the front steps. She reached out and gripped the iron handle, yanking hard. The door opened noiselessly, the hinges oiled and well cared for, and Runa stepped into a large, dimly lit room. In the center of the floor was a large metal basin with a fire burning inside it. The flames were a fulgent red, and as Runa approached, she didn't see any fuel to keep it going. Runa turned and eyed the walls covered with old and very intricate tapestries. She watched as one of the hangings fluttered gently, blown by an unseen breeze. "Dragons," Lyric whispered, walking past Runa to stare at one of the hangings. "Look, there is Zeldana, mother of creatures." Lyric pointed at a tall woman woven from gold and silver threads at the top of the tapestry. The figure's hands were outstretched, and her hair flowed around her body in soft silver like the shine of the moon. Beneath her feet were 4 dragons: Eri, ruler of air and sky, in white; Fury, the embodiment of fire, in red; Wrath, the avatar of earth, in black; and Sereth in blue, the sea serpent and ruler of water, mother of the Sireni. "I'm surprised Sereth is shown, considering the general opinion of her here," Lyric said. Runa nodded absently, her eyes caught on the red dragon. Staring at Fury's red and gold form, she felt something kindle deep in her chest, as if the fire within her recognized its origin. "Over here is a depiction of the Trinity," Kel called from across the room. "At the Thera, Hel, and Zeldana are all shown creating our world, as well as the summoning of Aya, the Mother Tree." Runa turned her head, following his voice. "And there, the birth of the 7, the demigods," Kel said. Runa knew their names: Orion, Hibaria, Temian, Florian, Aaron, Valen, and Vilain, though they weren't often mentioned in Alay's Hollow. The demigods had abandoned Aerith after the Demon War, disappearing to wherever gods go when they've become bored with their creations. Their desertion hadn't endeared them to many Khalisans. Even the dragons, who'd stayed for hundreds of years serving and settling disputes between the kingdoms after the demigods left, were hardly mentioned by the magic-fearing people of Runa's home. It was odd seeing them here, venerated and displayed for all to see. "They're beautiful," Lyric said, brushing the tips of her fingers against the fabric. "I've never seen anything like this." Lyric walked along the wall and stared up at another tapestry, this one depicting the Demon War, where demigods and dragons fought side by side against the fallen god Vilain. Runa eyed Vilain's black shape with curiosity. The weaver had surrounded the demigod with a multitude of twisting green shapes, as though she stood inside a poisoned cloud. Its color reminded Runa of the algae poisoning the land and water along the tainted shore. Opposite Vilain and her demon horde, in the bottom corner of the tapestry, Sereth was depicted fleeing from battle. Small human-shaped shadows dressed in white clung to the sea serpent's back and ran behind her. "I don't think they'd know what to do with this back home," Runa said. "Hanging in the inn?" Lyric chuckled. "Have you come for Brother Endi?" someone asked. Jumping, Runa spun around, her hand rising and the word for fire buzzing on the tip of her tongue. A teenage boy stood in the doorway, holding a broom and wearing an easygoing smile. "We're looking for a dragon blessed," Lyric said, stepping up beside Runa. Runa dropped her hand, irritated with herself that she'd been surprised. "Yes, that'd be Brother Endi," the boy said, walking towards them. His eyes were curious as he looked them over, and he spent extra time staring at Lyric. "He's gone to the Feast of Souls. Won't be back until the end of the week, if not later." "Who are you?" Runa asked, raising an eyebrow. The boy seemed too young to be a healer himself, but both Runa and Lyric had trained since childhood with Elena. He could be an apprentice. "I'm Colden. I keep the dragon fire burning." The boy pointed a finger at the basin. "I'm to ensure it doesn't go out." "And if it does go out?" Lyric asked curiously. "Well, then I tell Brother Endi." "Who isn't here?" Lyric said. "Well, he usually is." Colden chewed on his lip thoughtfully. "I suppose I'd have to send a Skyrunner or Raven after him, though I'm not sure Brother Endi would approve the cost of a runner." "A what?" Runa asked. Colden looked at her, both eyebrows raising into his hair. "You don't know what a Skyrunner is?" Kel, who'd moved up beside Runa when Colden arrived, leaned towards her left ear. "They're magic-enhanced birds," he whispered, "faster and more biddable than ravens." "Ravens don't always like to do what you tell them to," Colden said, grinning. "Too smart to be bossed around, I'd wager." He cocked his head. "Where are you from that you don't have a Skyrunner?" "Are there no other dragon blessed in the city?" Runa asked, ignoring the question. "Not that I'm aware of," Colden said. "Might Brother Endi return earlier if we can reach him?" Colden eyed Runa and leaned on the broom. I doubt it. I don't think anything would draw Blessed away from the Feast of Souls. It involves a rather demanding series of rituals which typically take place behind closed doors at the Temple of Flame. Unless the fire went out? Lyric asked. Would he come back then? Well, Colden looked at the fire burning in the basin. That's never actually happened, so who can say? He looked them over again. What do you need a Blessed for anyway? Rather rude to ask, don't you think? Runa asked. She tried not to glower, but the boy was getting on her nerves. Colden grinned and tapped the side of his nose. Ah, I understand. One of those problems. He looked between Kel, Runa, and Lyric and chuckled. No, Runa snapped. Not one of those problems. Kel coughed, and Runa avoided looking at him. Well, you'll have to wait until Brother Endy gets back, or you could go to the capital and try to find someone there, Colden said. If you decide to do that, though, I doubt you'll have much luck until the festival is over. Maybe a wise woman can help you? Where can we find her? Lyric asked. Probably at the Lady and Crab, Colden said, down by the docks. Is that an inn? Runa asked. It didn't sound like a place she'd have thought to look for the town's healer. Colden mimed drinking. Mistress Evie likes her beer. By this time of day, she's well into her cups. If she can't help you, then maybe one of the city guard's surgeons. We'll try the inn, Runa said. Thank you. She paused, remembering her oath. Where can I offer devotions to the Trinity? Despite being inside a temple, Runa didn't see any candles or incense for offering prayers. There are several shrines throughout the town, but we have a supplication garden at the back of the temple, Colden said. Should I lead you there? Yes, thank you, Runa said. Nodding, Colden gestured for them to follow. Walking to the back of the large room, he showed them a hidden hallway behind the wall. He led them through it to a door covered by a curtain of black wood beads, which exited to a small plot of land behind the temple. Black sand covered the ground, raked into spirals. In the center of the plot, 3 large black stone sculptures formed a triangle with the point facing north. Their shapes were simple, but it was clear they'd been carved to represent the 3 dragons, excluding Sereth. Inside the triangle were 3 additional figures, carved from white stone and standing on plain blocks. Runa brushed past Colden and walked into the center of the sand. Standing where she was, she could see the white figures were depictions of the Trinity. The sculptor had given shape to their faces and bodies, but hadn't carved their features or added any detail beyond the beautiful curving flow of their dresses. Stepping up to one of the figures, Runa recognized her as Ethathira by a small etching of a tree at the base of her skirt. Several wooden bowls filled with black sand and sticks of fragrant incense surround the goddess's feet. Lyric joined Runa on the sand, but Kel remained standing by the doorway. Colden, having disappeared inside while Runa examined the sculptures, returned with a small hammered metal bowl holding a burning candle. The candle's flame was the same vivid red as the dragon fire inside the temple. Picking up one of the unlit sticks, Runa whispered a prayer and lit the incense with the candle in Colden's bowl. She waved it gently until smoke curled towards the sky in a thin gray ribbon. Sticking the lit incense carefully in the black sand, Runa stepped back. Lyric repeated Runa's movements, and for several breaths the 2 of them quietly stood, heads bowed beneath the eyeless gaze of Ethathira. Thank you, Colden, Lyric said to the boy. She always did have a good memory for names. Of course, mistress, Colden said. If you decide to stay in town and wait for Brother Endy's return, I can send word when he's back. Thank you, but we don't have time to wait, Lyric said. Of course. May our mother, the great wanderer, bless you, and may the holy fire of the 3 guide and protect you. By sky, earth, and fire, wing and claw, so it is. So it is, Runa murmured. She looked at Lyric and saw her sister's eyes were smudged with worry. Let's go to the inn, Runa said. Nodding, Lyric followed her to the temple's door. Kel reached for Lyric's hand as they passed, and the 2 of them trailed behind Runa as she walked through the temple and returned to the street. Well, I hope you have a good weekend and a good next week. I'm going to be diving back into the Demon Queen, like I said in the intro, so I'll be busy writing. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye!